Hello, welcome to Revenant Reads. I'm Vin, and these are my BookTube goals for 2025. So I'm here right at the very end of 2024 and just thinking about what I want to accomplish, what are my goals for the year ahead, especially as it relates to BookTube and my reading. So I'm just going to kind of go briefly through some of my thoughts and what I hope to do this year. So one of the things I'm definitely going to be doing is continuing the reading events that I have created over the last few years. So the one that has just basically kicked off and that will officially begin really January 1st, within a few days of me recording this, is Historathon. If you don't know, Historathon is a year-long reading event where we read, discuss, and celebrate nonfiction history. It divides the year up into 4 quarters. Each quarter is 3 months long, and it looks at a different time period. And to participate, all you have to do is read a nonfiction history book that pertains to that time period. If you do that for each of the quarters, you have completely accomplished the challenge for Historathon. Really, if you read nonfiction history, you're kind of participating anyway. And I have a bunch of co-hosts that go along with me on this. We have a very lively Discord server as well. Lots of people, new people now who are participating. It just keeps growing, and it's been awesome seeing it really kind of take on a life of its own at this point. But I will, of course, be continuing with that and pushing it and reading history. That is the main thing that I generally read. Most of my reading is nonfiction history, although I have been trying to incorporate other types of books into my reading cycles, and my goals will sort of reflect that as I discuss. So Historathon, definitely going this year. Another event that I created, really my first year on BookTube, which I think it's almost 4 years ago now, is Book Trek. So Book Trek is a summer event where we basically read and geek out on Star Trek fiction. I'm a big Star Trek fan, and for the last few years, it's actually been sort of an all summer long event. So June, July, and August, all you gotta do is pick up some Star Trek fiction and give it a try. And that's something I do anyway. I am a teacher, and when the school year is over and summer begins, my version of kind of a relaxed beach read is Star Trek fiction. So it's not on camera, it's kind of right over here, but I have a bookcase just filled with a bunch of Star Trek books, things that I've kind of picked up really over the years at like secondhand bookstores or especially library book sales, where you can walk out with a bag full of books for $5. So I've got a whole bunch of them, and usually in the summer I just start pulling from there. I'm not usually much of a mood reader, but in that situation I am. Whatever happens to look interesting to me at the time, I grab it and I start reading it. So Book Trek will certainly be happening again this year, and yeah, of course, if you like Star Trek, especially if you've never tried Star Trek fiction, I encourage you to come along with us on that. And I do believe that at the end of 2025, for December, we will once again have it will be our second iteration of Ghosts of Christmas Past Resurrecting a Tradition. So that is an event that I created where we try to revive and recapture and reclaim the Victorian tradition of reading ghost stories around Christmas time. So it was a big hit. I think people had a lot of fun with it this past year. I certainly did. And yeah, I plan to run it again next December. So those are the things that I have created that I'm definitely going to be doing again in 2025. Some other BookTube events that I may participate in. Well, first and foremost, I guess, would be Sagalong. So Sagalong is an event that was around before I joined BookTube, but it was one of my favorite events, and it was essentially where there was a group read of an Icelandic saga. And last year, I was fortunate enough to be one of the co-hosts for the event. That was my first time being a co-host, not just a participant. And I'm really hoping that that event goes on again. So if that happens, probably either be April or May, I will certainly be reading an Icelandic saga with the group. Before that March, I kind of go back and forth, it seems like each year, between March of the Mammoths, where people will pick an 800 plus page book that has been sitting on their shelf and just at least get it started to be read in March, which I think is a great event. But there is also Middle Grade March, which encourages people to read middle grade fiction, or at least younger people's fiction. And I might sway more towards Middle Grade March this year because I have some books kind of on this shelf over here that are for younger readers that have been sitting there, that it'll give me a good excuse to read through those. So in March, I might take part in middle grade March rather than March of the Mammoths. In May, there's sort of a defunct event, maybe Midrash. It didn't really run last year, but it used to be an event in which in May you would read works that dealt seriously with religion. Usually the prompt was reading something nonfiction and fiction, and it's something I kind of did on my own even after the event kind of stopped being hosted. But I might do something for maybe Midrash again in May, although I have been reading more things on religion anyway throughout the year. So I might not need to focus in May on that. I might just kind of pepper it in throughout the year anyway. And I'll kind of talk about the sort of religion books that I'm speaking of in just a little bit. And I think the only other event that I'll probably participate in is Shaktember. So that is each September where the spotlight is on Shakespeare. So this past September, I read King Lear. And I think 2 years before that, I read Macbeth. But I'll probably read another Shakespeare play. But otherwise, I'm mostly going to be focusing on my own personal reading projects. So what are those? One of them is my Stephen King reading project. You can see all the Stephen King books I have there. And that is essentially me just going through these books. All the books that you see in here, on this shelf and on that shelf, these are my TBR shelves. I'm inside my office. Downstairs is our library, and that's where I put the books that I've read. So after I read them, after I make my videos about them, I will bring them downstairs and I put them in the library. So everything that you see here is not yet read. And I have a whole shelf here and also some over here that are just Stephen King. There's also a couple up here. So what I'm doing is reading all Stephen King books that I own. I'm not doing an exhaustive study on Stephen King and reading every single thing that he wrote, but everything that I own, I'm pretty much reading in publication order. So I read 3 books in 2024, one of them being The Stand. It's a pretty sizable book. That was my March of the Mammoth pick for 2024. And I'm probably going to read at least like every season a Stephen King book. Maybe, I'm hoping to have a little more frequency than that. But I have a lot of other things I'm trying to read as well. But at least once a season, I should be reading a Stephen King book and going through those. I want to also read other horror. This top shelf that you see up here, those are just horror books, so I want to go through those. And I also want to read more historical fiction. So I've been slowly kind of putting that sort of thing into my reading cycles, but I think I'm going to do something this year as sort of a Historathon side quest. That is within Historathon when you are basically experiencing history or learning about history in other ways rather than just reading it. Or reading nonfiction history. So it could be going to a museum, it could be watching movies, listening to music, whatever it might be. We have a whole channel on the Historathon Discord just dedicated to people sharing their side quests. But what I think one of my side quests will be this year is reading historical fiction that fits into the different Historathon time periods. So I actually started one here in the second half of December, the kind of thing I'm talking about. So I found this at a secondhand store earlier this year. But this is Bruce McBain, Roman Games, Plinius Secundus Mystery. So a murder mystery set in the ancient Roman Empire. So yeah, these are the sorts of things that I'll probably pick up and read as side quests. So for the first quarter, I don't have much to read. I think the only book that I have other than this that's set in the first quarter of Historathon, which is prehistory up to the year 500, is The Last Temptation of Christ. So maybe I'll read that during that quarter. But the second quarter looks at the years 500 to 1500, and I definitely have a bunch of stuff about the Middle Ages that I could read. And going forward, I have a lot of other things that will fit the quarters. So that's going to be my other fiction focus, is trying to get more historical fiction into my reading. For nonfiction, when I talked about the religion studies, one of the things I'm going to be focusing on is kind of pagan/witchcraft occult studies. It's just an area that I've grown more and more interested in. I've looked at things like neo-paganism and ritual practices and modern application of animism. All those sorts of things have really become somewhat academic, almost interest to me, and some of it applicable and actually, something that I have been practicing in very small ways, not witchcraft and that sort of thing. I'm not a polytheist, nor do I believe in magic. I am pretty much an agnostic atheist, and for the most part, a secular humanist. But I have been adopting some atheo-pagan practices. But overall, it's just become it's just become an interest of mine, something that I want to delve further into understanding, maybe getting inspiration from. So that's something I'll be looking at. And tied to that, I want to try and get into some more scientific books that have to do with nature studies, just so I can understand the natural world a little bit more, which I think goes along very nicely with animistic practices and nature-based rituals and those sorts of things that you find in neo-paganism. And the last nonfiction thing, I guess, that I'll be looking at is continuing to learn French. So 2 years ago, I did a year studying Latin, and that was fun. Although I kind of just hit a certain plateau, and I wanted to try something else. I am not somebody who is trying to become a polyglot. I am not trying to become fluent in languages. I use the study of foreign languages as sort of a mental exercise. I like the kind of puzzly aspect of it. It is not something that takes up a huge part of my day, but it is something I do a little bit of every day. And this past year, I have been looking at French. So I can do some basic French stuff. My focus is on reading and not necessarily speaking. But my goal is to, and I had this as a goal last year, but I didn't quite reach it. My goal is to start reading some more basic works in French. Nothing really hard, but just basic stuff. And who knows, maybe after this year I'll move on to another language. It's just something fun for me that I like to do. But yeah, I think that pretty much covers my goals, my BookTube goals for 2025. If any of those sound interesting to you, please, if you're not already joined in on some of the events, join in. Yeah, we of course would love to have you. And if you have any advice for me on the other goals that I have that you've just shared, I'd also love to hear those. So, as always, thank you, BookTube.